Most people associate survival with starting fires and building shelters. When they think of ancient Celts, they picture wild warriors with blue paint on their faces, charging into battle with no plan. That image is completely wrong. The reality is something far more sophisticated. The Celtic tribes that dominated vast parts of Europe for over 2 millennia did not see a difference between survival and daily life. Their deadliest advantage was not the sword in their hand, it was their mastery of the landscape itself. While we have been told a simple story of barbarians, the archaeological evidence reveals an integrated system of wilderness skills more advanced than most people realize. But what if the image of the savage Celt was just propaganda told by their enemies to justify conquest? What is really behind the myth? And could it be that we have been looking at their entire culture wrong? Today we are going to reveal 7 essential skills that allowed Celtic culture to thrive for over 2,000 years across some of Europe's harshest environments. This is not just a history of ancient techniques. This is the story of a wilderness philosophy that modern experts are only now beginning to rediscover. The myth versus the reality. To really understand Celtic wilderness mastery, we have to confront the false image created by their greatest enemies. The Romans were masters of propaganda. Writers like Livy and Florus described the Celts as fighting like wild beasts, a chaotic horde who charged headlong with no strategy. This narrative served a purpose. It framed the Romans as bringers of order to a savage world. The caricature is powerful. We picture warriors with lime-washed hair, screaming war cries as they throw themselves mindlessly at disciplined Roman lines. And there is a kernel of truth here. The psychological element of Celtic culture was undeniably potent. They used fear as a weapon. The carnix, a great bronze war horn shaped like an animal's head, was designed to shatter enemy morale before the first blow was struck. But this image conveniently ignores the sophistication beneath. It was Julius Caesar himself who contradicted these earlier accounts, describing organized formations and tactical intelligence. The myth of the wild barbarian reduces a complex culture to a single stereotype. Here is where we see a parallel to our own time. For many today, survival is a weekend hobby. We watch videos on bushcraft, learning to build shelters or start fires before returning to the comfort of modern homes. The Celts did not visit the wilderness, they were an extension of it, and they were not wild barbarians, they were masters of their environment. What the Romans saw as chaos was actually a different philosophy, one based on fluidity, adaptability, and an unshakable connection to the land itself. That brings us to the core truth. For the Celts, mastery of the landscape was survival. Their wilderness skills were not separate knowledge. They were the fundamental building blocks of daily life. Knowing how to move through a forest, how to read terrain, how to live off the land, these were not optional skills. They were essential. Wilderness mastery and everyday existence were two sides of the same coin. Over the next several minutes, we will examine 7 specific techniques that embody this philosophy. These are not random tricks. They are interconnected skills that formed a complete system, one that kept Celtic civilization alive and thriving for over 2 millennia. Technique Number 1. Terrain literacy. Modern hikers rely on GPS, compasses, and paper maps. Lose your phone battery in the backcountry, and suddenly you are lost. The Celts navigated by something entirely different: profound terrain literacy. This was not just memorizing landmarks, it was a granular, multi-sensory understanding of their homeland. They knew the game trails that allowed silent passage. They recognized the subtle shifts in vegetation that indicated water sources. They read the angle of hillsides to predict weather patterns. They understood which ridges would hide movement and which valleys would amplify sound. This terrain literacy was passed down through generations, encoded in stories, songs, and daily practice. Children learned to read the forest the way modern children learn to read street signs. By adulthood, a Celt could navigate vast distances through dense woodland without a single tool, guided only by intimate knowledge of the land. The archaeological evidence supports this. Celtic settlements were always positioned with strategic awareness. Hilltop oppida controlled trade routes and river crossings, while smaller farmsteads clustered near reliable water and fertile soil. This was not accident. This was the result of systematic environmental observation refined over centuries. Historical accounts reveal the tactical application of this skill. When Roman legions marched through Gaul, Celtic warriors used their terrain knowledge to devastating effect. They struck from positions the Romans could not anticipate and vanished into landscapes they could not navigate. The ambush near Faesulae, where Celtic forces used forest cover and knowledge of local paths to inflict heavy losses, demonstrates terrain literacy as a survival advantage. In our modern world of digital navigation, we have lost this fundamental skill, but the Celtic approach reminds us of something important. The best navigation system is the one that cannot be lost, broken, or run out of battery. It is the knowledge in your mind and the awareness in your senses. Technique 2, the multi-purpose woolen cloak. Walk into any outdoor store today and you will see specialized gear for every function. A rain jacket for waterproofing, a sleeping bag for warmth, a tarp for shelter, a backpack to carry it all. The Celts had one item that did all of these things, the woolen cloak. This was not just a piece of clothing. It was a complete survival system woven into a single garment, made from tightly woven wool, often treated with natural oils. The Celtic cloak was remarkably waterproof. The lanolin naturally present in sheep's wool repelled rain, while the dense weave prevented wind penetration. During the day it was worn as a garment, providing insulation without restricting movement. At night it became a blanket, large enough to wrap the entire body. In extreme weather it could be draped over a simple frame to create an emergency shelter. The cloak's earthy colors, browns, greens, grays, provided natural camouflage in forest environments. But the genius of the woolen cloak goes deeper. Unlike modern synthetic materials that lose insulating properties when wet, wool retains warmth even when soaked. This was critical in the damp climates of Britain, Gaul, and Ireland, where staying dry was often impossible. A Celt caught in a rainstorm remained functional. A Roman soldier in the same conditions, despite his advanced equipment, suffered. The archaeological record confirms the importance of this garment. Woolen textiles appear frequently in Celtic graves, often pinned with elaborate brooches that indicate high status. The cloak was not just practical, it was a symbol of Celtic identity. Compare this to modern gear philosophy. We carry separate items for separate functions, creating weight, complexity, and multiple points of failure. The Celtic approach was different, maximum versatility from minimum equipment. One well-made cloak replaced half a modern backpack. This is not about abandoning modern technology. It is about understanding the principle. The best gear serves multiple purposes and remains functional under the worst conditions. Technique number 3. Fire is the foundation of wilderness survival. In modern times, we rely on lighters and matches, convenient tools that fail when wet or run out. The Celts used a method that worked in any condition, striking flint against iron pyrite to create sparks. This technique required skill, but once mastered, it was virtually foolproof. A piece of flint and a chunk of pyrite could fit in a small pouch and last indefinitely. The process involved striking the flint at the correct angle to shave hot sparks onto a bed of prepared tinder, typically dried grass, birch bark, or fungus like amadou. The key was preparation. Celtic fire starters kept their tinder dry in waterproof containers made from birch bark or hollowed horn. They knew which materials caught spark most easily, the inner bark of certain trees, dried moss, cattail fluff. This knowledge meant that even in rain-soaked forests, a skilled Celt could produce fire within minutes. But fire served purposes beyond warmth and cooking. The Celts understood fire as a communication tool. Great bonfires on hilltops transmitted messages across vast distances, coordinating communities separated by dense forest and rugged terrain. In conflicts, they used decoy fires to mislead enemies, creating the illusion of camps in one location while moving forces to another. The historical record from Caesar's Gallic campaigns mentions night ambushes where Celtic forces used fire strategically, catching Roman units off guard. This was not primitive, it was sophisticated tactical thinking. Fire also played a role in land management. Celts practiced controlled burning to clear undergrowth, encourage new plant growth for grazing animals, and reduce fuel loads that could cause uncontrollable wildfires. This was ecosystem management on a civilization-wide scale, demonstrating an understanding of forest dynamics that modern wildfire science is only now validating. The flint and pyrite method represents more than just fire starting. It represents the Celtic principle of carrying knowledge, not just equipment. A modern lighter is convenient until it fails. The skill to create fire from stone never runs out. The sophisticated systems we have explored up to this point challenge the simple narrative of primitive barbarians. The story of Celtic wilderness mastery is a reminder that there are different approaches to resilience, different definitions of security. If you are finding this journey into forgotten knowledge as compelling as it is practical, make sure you subscribe and enable notifications. There is much more wisdom from past cultures waiting to be rediscovered. Technique number 4. Water purification using natural filtration. Clean water is survival. Modern backpackers carry chemical tablets or mechanical filters, effective tools that require resupply and can fail. The Celts developed a natural filtration system using materials found in any forest: charcoal, sand, and moss. The process began with creating charcoal by burning hardwood in a low-oxygen environment, producing porous carbon that absorbed impurities. This charcoal was crushed into various sizes, sand was collected from stream beds, moss was harvested from rocks or trees. These three materials were layered inside a container, often a hollowed log section or a cone shaped from birch bark. Water poured into the top would gravity feed through the layers. Coarse charcoal filtered large particles, sand trapped smaller contaminants, and moss caught fine sediment. The result was water dramatically clearer and safer than the source. While not perfect by modern standards, this method removed most harmful bacteria and parasites, making marginal water sources drinkable. The brilliance of this system was its sustainability. If a filter broke or clogged, a new one could be constructed in less than an hour using materials underfoot. There were no replacement parts to order, no supply chain to depend on. The knowledge to build the filter was the only requirement. Celtic settlements near rivers and springs show evidence of constructed water features, stone-lined channels and collecting pools that suggest sophisticated understanding of hydrology. These were not just convenience, they were public health infrastructure that reduced waterborne illness and supported larger populations. This technique illustrates a fundamental Celtic principle: the best technology is the technology you can rebuild from available resources. Modern filters are more efficient, but they create dependency. The Celtic method created resilience. Cordage from plant fibers. Rope and cordage are essential for shelter building, tool making, and equipment repair. Modern survival kits include paracord, strong, lightweight, and effective until you run out. The Celts made cordage from plants, primarily nettles and tree bark, creating rope that was renewable and always available. Nettle fiber cordage was particularly prized. Despite the plant's painful sting when fresh, once processed, nettle fibers were soft, strong, and rot-resistant. The process involved harvesting mature nettle stalks in late summer, retting them in water to separate fibers from the woody core, then drying and twisting the fibers into thread and rope. The resulting cordage was remarkably strong. Archaeological finds of nettle textiles from Celtic bog burials show material that has survived over 2,000 years underwater, testament to the fiber's durability. Celtic warriors used nettle cordage for bowstrings, an application requiring high tensile strength and weather resistance. Tree bark provided another cordage source. Lime tree bark, willow bark, and certain root fibers could be processed into workable cordage with less effort than nettle. While not as strong, bark cordage was adequate for many applications, lashing shelter frames, making fishing nets, securing loads. The knowledge of which plants provided the best fibers, when to harvest them, and how to process them was specialized expertise passed through apprenticeship. But once learned, it provided endless supply. A Celt traveling through unknown territory could always produce cordage because the raw materials were ubiquitous. This contrasts sharply with modern dependency on manufactured rope. Paracord is excellent until it is gone. Then you need a store. The Celtic approach was different. If you needed rope, you made it. This self-sufficiency was not romantic primitivism, it was practical engineering using renewable resources. Technique 6. Bark containers for water boiling. Boiling water is critical for purification and cooking, but it requires a heat-resistant container. Modern hikers carry metal pots, heavy rigid items that take up pack space. The Celts made temporary containers from birch bark that could boil water over an open fire. This seems impossible. Bark is flammable. How can it hold water over fire without burning? The answer is elegant physics. As long as the bark remains in contact with water, the water absorbs heat energy and prevents the bark from reaching ignition temperature. The water boils, the bark stays intact. The process required selecting the right bark. Birch was ideal because of its natural oils and layered structure. A section was carefully removed from a fallen tree, folded into a cone or box shape, and sealed at the seams with pine resin. The result was a watertight container that could be suspended over a fire using a tripod of sticks. These containers were not permanent cookware, they lasted for several uses before the bark degraded. But that was the point. They were temporary solutions made from abundant materials. When one wore out, another could be crafted in minutes. No weight carried, no space consumed until needed. Archaeological evidence of Celtic cooking sites shows fire pits with arrangements of stones that suggest suspended containers. While the bark itself rarely survives, the techniques were documented by later observers and have been successfully replicated by experimental archaeologists. This technique embodies Celtic ingenuity, solving problems with materials at hand rather than carrying solutions. Modern backpackers debate titanium versus aluminum cookware. The Celts asked, why carry anything we can make when needed? Technique 7. Wattle and daub shelter construction. Permanent shelter is the foundation of civilization, but it requires materials and techniques that can be sustained long-term. Modern building depends on industrial materials, milled lumber, concrete, metal fasteners. Celtic roundhouses used a technique called wattle and daub, woven branches covered with mud plaster that created remarkably durable structures from local resources. The wattle framework began with vertical wooden posts driven into the ground in a circular pattern. Flexible branches, usually hazel, willow, or young oak, were woven horizontally between the posts, creating a basket-like wall. This structure provided strength and flexibility, able to withstand high winds without rigid joints that could fail. The daub was a mixture of clay soil, straw, and sometimes animal dung. This mixture was plastered onto both sides of the wattle frame, creating a thick insulating wall. Once dried, daub became remarkably hard and weather-resistant. Lime wash could be applied to the exterior for additional waterproofing. The result was a structure that was thermally efficient, using thick walls and a thatched roof to maintain temperature. Celtic roundhouses stayed warm in winter and cool in summer, with no external energy input. The circular design also had practical advantages: no corners for snow to accumulate, even distribution of structural stress, and efficient use of interior space. What makes this technique remarkable is its accessibility. Every material came from within walking distance of the building site. The knowledge to construct a weatherproof home could be passed from parent to child. There was no dependence on external supply chains or specialized manufacturing. This was not primitive architecture, it was appropriate technology. Celtic builders created permanent, comfortable homes using skills and materials that would always be available. In an era where modern housing requires global supply chains and expert contractors, the Celtic approach offers a different model: shelter as a skill, not a product. These 7 techniques are not isolated skills. They form an interconnected system where each element reinforces the others. Terrain literacy guides you to the best materials for cordage and shelter. Fire-making knowledge lets you create charcoal for water filtration. The multi-purpose cloak provides warmth while you construct a wattle frame. Bark containers allow you to process nettles for rope. This is the essence of Celtic wilderness mastery. Not a collection of random tricks, but a coherent philosophy. Modern survival often focuses on gear, buying the right equipment to solve problems. The Celtic approach was different, developing skills that allowed you to create solutions from the environment itself. This created a form of resilience that modern people have largely lost. A Celt displaced from home could rebuild anywhere the landscape provided basic resources: timber, water, clay, plant fibers. They carried their survival capacity in their knowledge, not in their pack. Historical evidence shows this system in action. When Celtic tribes migrated across Europe, they established new settlements in unfamiliar territories and thrived. When Roman conquest disrupted trade networks, Celtic communities continued functioning because they were not dependent on distant resources. This was not mere survival, it was resilient prosperity built on local materials and transmitted knowledge. The archaeological record supports this view. Celtic sites show consistent patterns of resource use: local timber for construction, local stone for tools, local plants for textiles and medicine. They were not isolated. Trade networks existed and were used, but they were not dependent. The difference is critical. What do you think is the most valuable skill we can learn from Celtic wilderness mastery? Share your thoughts in the comments. Now, if you want to explore how another ancient culture developed a completely different survival system in a radically different environment, check out the video on screen. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.